Thank you for joining us. We're excited to share with you our latest research project around transfer, looking at the geographic barriers that students encounter transfer. We're going to go ahead and get started. So let's go to the next slide. So in case you're not familiar with us, the RP Group, or the Research and Planning Group for California Community Colleges, we're an independent nonprofit that works alongside the California Community College System. We are a representative organization for the researchers and planners that work across the 116 colleges in our system. We conduct research like what we're going to share with you today. We do professional development, which we're just coming off of from our Strengthening Student Success Conference last week. And so we're excited to, again, if you're not familiar with us, thank you for coming. Thank you for supporting us. So today we're going to start very briefly with an outline, an overview of the research that led to the current project, and then we're going to dive deep into what we've learned thus far. And then we are joined by panelists from colleges that are in what we call the university education desert, so that you can hear their perspectives, and we will introduce them a little bit later. Next slide. So all of this started with a project I can't believe it's been like 10 years since we started on the Through the Gate initiative. But if we go to the next slide, this project was one where we really were trying to identify students who had completed all or most of their transfer requirements, but then didn't transfer. And we learned a lot from that study. We learned that transfer is not a dichotomous variable where either you do it or you don't, but that it's a journey that students take, and there are different kind of spots along the way of that continuum to transfer. Go to the next slide. So that transfer continuum, our first group of students are those students who, over a 6-year period, they complete somewhere between 12 and 44 units, transferable units, but they don't transfer in that time period. The next one from there are the students who have made it to 45 units, but not yet to 60. They have the 2.0. They may or may not have completed their math, but they've demonstrated some serious momentum. They're, again, within about 15 or so units of reaching that magic 60 unit threshold. Near the gate are the students who have reached the 60 units, transferable units. They have the 2.0, but they don't have their English and math completed. So that is, they could have one or the other or neither, but they don't have both. And then the next step is our at the gate students, who are very similar to our near the gate, with the exception that they have completed their math and English. Again, they still have the 60 units, they still have the 2.0, and they have their math and English completed, or they've completed an ADT. So that's our at the gate students. But again, our at the gate and our near the gate students are the students who have done these things but have not transferred. And then finally, we have our transfer achievers, who are the ones who made it through the gate to transfer. So that was our a continuum that we created. On the next slide, we have a few other findings from that study. We found that of those at the gate and near the gate students, many of them had stopped attending college, altogether, and had left without any kind of credential, no degree, no certificate, or any of that. So that's concerning. This particular study, as I mentioned, happened about 10 years ago, so it was pre-AB 705. So at the time, we found that most of the students, 92% actually, of the near the gate students, remember those are the ones who are missing English or math or both, 92% of them were missing math. So it was a major barrier for that group of students. I would love to find support to replicate this study in probably another year or two to see how AB 705 may or may not have affected these results. Time is the enemy. Basically, what that means is that we looked at the students who had successfully transferred, and we looked back to see, well, when did they hit that near the gate a milestone, and how much time elapsed from them getting to that point, that near the gate point, and actually transferring. And what we found was most students who did end up transferred within 1 year of reaching that near the gate milestone. And if they didn't transfer within 1 year, their chances of transferring went down significantly. Our Hispanic and our Latinx students, what we found with them is that they were, first of all, they was not on here, they were most likely to earn an ADT across all the racial and ethnic groups, but they were also the group that was the least likely to transfer and therefore the most likely to get to that at the gate or near the gate status and stop. But what kind of led to this study and wanting us to really dig deeper into these findings was the regional differences that we found, both in terms of the uptake of the ADT, okay, what proportion of students were completing those ADTs, and the different transfer rates that we found uh, across regions. If we go to the next slide.
So we started to take a look at research that is already out there existing that took a look at, whether geography affects college enrollment. And basically what we found is that research there reveals that there is a clear link between geography and college enrollments. Basically saying that the farther away a student lived from a college or university, the less likely they were to attend. Now, there are three kind of different reasons that the research points to that could explain why this is so. The first one being this concept of distance elasticity, which basically just means that the further away a student it lives from a college, the less likely they are to attend, kind of like having that elasticity connected to the college. But there's also a proximity effect, whereby having a college nearby kind of encourages students to pursue higher education because it kind of creates like this college going culture, and there just be more, visible reminders of college nearby. And of course, there are social influences and community ties that could be affecting whether or not students choose to enroll. And we see that there are different social circles that influences and community connections, and different groups of students may be affected by their social influence in communities in different ways. So for this kind of project, we started looking into the concept of university education deserts. So if you're familiar with like food deserts, this is kind of a similar concept where basically we map where there are university options around where a student lives, and any area that has very few or no college options nearby is considered a university education desert. Now, when we looked into the research about like what criteria they use to define an area as a university education desert or a UED, it usually involves two different criteria. First, that having to do with distance, where they take a look to see like what is that mileage cutoff that affects enrollment into college or university, and then how accessible that university is to the students. So any kind of broad access university is considered accessible, and something, for example, like Harvard University would be considered limited access because it's harder to get into a college like that. So for the research, what we saw is that there was this common definition of what would be considered a university education desert area, and that would be an area that had no public university within 25 miles of the home of the student, that within a college that has at least an 80% acceptance rate. And so we took that definition and tried to apply it to California. And we were interested in two different things for this project. First, we were interested to see where there are university education deserts in the California education system, and which students were being serviced by community colleges in these areas. And then what relationship exists between attending a university education desert college and then transferring to an institution that offers a bachelor's degree. Now, with the previous research, a lot of the times they considered having a community college as an option. And so for us, we're really wondering which community colleges are in UEDs, and not having that university option to transfer is what we would consider a university education desert. And so we were interested in taking this definition and first seeing if it had worked for California's landscape, and if not, what kind of definition we could be applying that would work for us. And so when we take a look and started mapping our education system here in California, we know of two California public university systems. The first one being the California State University, and it has 23 campuses across California. And then we have 9 UC campuses that are scattered abroad. And if you see this map over to the right, you'll see that the little dots represent either a CSU or a UC. And you already see that there is kind of a pattern of where they are located. They're not kind of evenly spread out throughout California, but rather they tend to be kind of a clump together, kind of in the Bay Area, San Francisco area, that space, and then a lot in kind of LA, Orange County, and San Diego. So we're already trying to see that there may be some discrepancies about like what access to students may have because the university education system is not broadly located across California. So then when we map the college community colleges in California, we have 116 campuses, although Calbright is not on here because it's online. But you see the pattern is kind of similar to where these UCs and CSUs are located. There are more of them located within that San Francisco area, more of them located in that LA and Orange County area. But we do see a little bit more spread out where we are starting to see some community colleges located more in the upper north and more along the borders and in Central California. So we wanted to see if the location of where these community colleges might be affecting worse whether or not a student is transferring. So what we did here is we mapped where the distance to the nearest university where that college was located, and then mapped that transfer rate for the college overall. And so the colleges that the distance is down here, so the further the dot is on this axis, that means the further away they are from a UC or a CSU, and then the transfer rate is on this axis. And as if you've noticed within the 25 miles, which a lot of the existing research says that this is what was kind of the cutoff for university desert. We are not really seeing a pattern of distance affecting transfer rates. We see the transfer rates in within this 25-mile kind of location, varying from below 20% to above 50%, but not seeing a pattern here. But once you take a look at that kind of 25 mark, we start to see the pattern start emerging or a correlation start emerging here. And we did see that there was a significant correlation between mileage of the distance to the nearest university and transfer rate, where at 25 miles, the rate starts going down. And we did see that no college that was at least 25 miles away from the nearest university had a transfer rate above 40. Then we saw that at around 80 miles, there was another significant drop where the colleges that were at least 80 miles away had lower transfer rates. And so we took this kind of information, we looked at the broad access, we saw that that didn't really affect anything. And so we decided that to define a college as being in a university education desert, we would only use the distance to categorize it. And we decided to kind of break these out into 2 tiers. So the first tier are going to be any colleges that are at least 80 miles away from the nearest UC or CSU. The second tier are going to be those colleges that are between 25 miles and 75 miles between the nearest UC and CSU. And then all the other colleges that are within the 25 miles are not going to be considered a university education desert. And so taking these kind of definitions that we came up with, we wanted to see which ones fell into tier 1 and tier 2. Those colleges that were in tier 2 represented about a little over 18,000 students in our data sample here. They're comprised about 7 colleges that were between 87 and 211 miles away from the nearest California public university. So one thing to kind of note about these colleges is that 91% of these colleges were located in what we call a rural community, according to IPED's categorization. So we're starting to see that these colleges are the ones that are more toward the borders of California, so the Oregon border, Nevada border, Arizona border, and Mexico border here, but they all are significantly distance away from the UCs and the CSUs. And then those colleges that are in tier two, so they're still relatively further away from the colleges. There, we saw about 139,000 students in our data sample here. It was comprised of 22 different colleges that are listed here. And for the most part, these colleges were located in suburbs and cities. But when we map these out on the map, you see that these are more kind of in more of like central, middle-ish part of California, not quite at the border, but also not quite at the coast where most of the UCs and the CSUs are located. So still some distance away from the UCs and the CSUs. So then we wanted to see if we could see a pattern between the transfer rates of these colleges in these different tiers, and see if we could see some sort of relationship between distance and transfer rate. And so when we looked to see who is being served by these university education desert colleges, we saw that there were more Latinx students that are being served in colleges in both tier one and tier two compared to those in the non-UEDs, whereas those in the tier one and tier two, over half of the student population in our sample were identified as Latina. And we also saw a significantly few proportion of Asian students being served by colleges and UEDs compared to the non-UED colleges. And although I don't have a graph here because they would only comprise about 1 to 2% of the total population, when we take a look at Native American students as a whole, we saw that 28% of them were students that were being served by colleges in the tier one university education desert, which again are the ones that are at least 80 miles away. We also saw that there were more first generation, low income, and EOPS students that are being served here, whereas in tier ones and tier two, almost a vast majority of them, 80% and 78% of them were being served by colleges in the university education deserts compared to only 67 in non-UEDs. And although we didn't see quite as big a difference with first generation students, there are still slightly more of them that are in those first two tiers of colleges. So now we wanted to take a look to see if we saw a pattern within these transfer outcomes. And so we're going to be comparing the transfer continuum, so not just to see who gets to transfer, but seeing if we can see a difference between how far along within the continuum they got based on distance. And what we saw is that a larger proportion of tier one students are not making it past that explorer stage. So if you remember with this stage, or those are the students that are completing 12 to 44 units, but not really making it past that. And so we're seeing over half of those tier one students being staying at this stage of the continuum, and slightly more of the tier two compared to non-UEDs as well. And those who, once they make it along the continuum, we're not seeing as much differences between students that are making to momentum and near the gate. But if they do make it past the explorer states, we're seeing that more likely of those in the UEDs are to stay at the gate. But then again, we are seeing those biggest differences of who actually makes it to transfer. So we did see a positive correlation, significant difference here between the tier one, tier two, and the non-UEDs, whereas those in tier one had the lowest transfer rate at 28%, tier two had 33%, and the non-UED students were transferring at a 36%. So we're seeing here that the farther away that a college is located from the nearest university, the lower their transfer rate are going to be for those students. When we take a look to see if there are differences among different groups of students, we did see that there were differences with our male students that were being more impacted by distance. Those male students that were being serviced by the colleges in the first tier had the lowest rate compared to those in tier two and non-UEDs, but we weren't seeing as much differences within the female students in these three areas. They had somewhat similar transfer rates. And then when we take a look to see with our first generation and low income, we are again seeing slight differences where that the further away those kind of students are being serviced by those colleges, the lower their transfer rates. And this is true for our first generation and low income students. And then when we take a look to see if there are differences among the ethnic and racial groups, we are seeing those performance gaps that we tend to typically see with when we take a look at students by ethnicity and race. But what we're seeing here is that these performance gaps are being exacerbated by the distance. And so although we do see performance gaps in our transfer rates, we see that those students then those tier one especially are experiencing those lower transfer rates. So with our Asian students, with our Black students, even with our Latina and Native American students and our white students, we are seeing that those students that were being serviced by colleges in that first year experienced the largest. So now we're going to follow students along to see where they actually transfer to. So we see that we are seeing differences on who actually transfers, but we also wanted to see if we saw differences where they ended up going. And so we mapped to see where students ended up transferring, and we saw that most students were transferring to the CSU across all three tiers. So this is not really surprising because we have more of those CSU campuses and they tend to accept more of our community college students. But we are seeing that slight differences that like those in tier one transfer to a CSU at a slightly lower rate than the other two categories. But we do see that there is a difference in who is transferring to the UC campuses. So those in the non-UED tiers that had closer proximity to these universities were transferring to UC at 21% compared to only 9% of those students in tier one that were transferring to a UC. And these differences could probably be explained by that big difference of who we saw transferring out of state. Now, for these students, we saw that the ones in the tier one colleges, 38% of them were transferring to a university that was out of state. And this is a rate almost double that of those that transferred out of state in tier two and in a non-UED. And if you remember, if you're looking at the map, this could be also be explained because these are the colleges that were located along the California border. When we take a closer look to see if there are differences in between student groups of where they ended up transferring, we wanted to focus here in the ethnic and racial groups because this is where we saw kind of the biggest differences of where students ended up going. And kind of that large difference in who transferred out of state is kind of being explained at who opted to transfer out of state. So when we take a look at out-of-state transfers specifically, we saw that there were transfer rates were higher for students in that tier one across most of our ethnic and racial groups. If you see here, our Pacific Islander, our Black and African American students, and our Native American students and white students, large proportion of them are transferring out of state compared to those both in the tier two and the non-UEDs. White multiracial students and those that we don't know the race, a little over half of them are going out of state. But then we start seeing differences here in the Asian and Latinx students, where these students appear to be preferring to stay closer to home or just opting to transfer to universities that are more closer because fewer of them are going out of state. So we're seeing that there are differences and where they are going, as well as the differences and who gets to transfer. And so we also map to see not just within California, but across the United States where students were transferring. And when we calculated that distance from that kind of home community college institution and where the student ended up transferring, we saw that that students that were in that first year traveled over 150 miles farther to attend a university compared to those in a non-UED tier. Uh, when we also took a look to see who were the kind of top institutions of where students were transferring, the students that were in Tier 1 was the only group that included an out-of-state institution in their top transfer institution, and this was the University of Nevada, Reno. And then when we took a look to see the whether the proximity of an out-of-state institution made a difference on those who transferred, we saw that the proximity kind of mitigated those lower transfer rates. And so for the colleges that had a close out-of-state option, their kind of transfer rates were a little bit higher, and more of their students were transferring to that out-of-state institution because it was even closer than their California option. And we specifically saw this with the College of the Siskiyous, which had Southern Oregon University that was only about 40 miles away for their students to get there, but their closest California option was 211 miles away. And so we saw more of them going to Oregon than to their California option because it was closer. But when we looked to look at another university that also, or another college that was also really far away from the university, Palo Verde College, they were 180 miles from their nearest California option, but their out-of-state option was also a similar distance away. And so that school had one of the lowest transfer rates because they didn't have options either within the state or out of the state. Darla, you want to take uh, over at this part?
Sure. Thank you, Daisy. I'm not sure you introduced yourself or I introduced you, but Daisy Zagovia, who is our senior researcher and the person who has done all this wonderful research and this very engaging PowerPoint. In my opinion, I'm a little biased, but thank you, Daisy. So, what are the bottom lines? Distance matters. That's really kind of the bottom line, and that it was as little as 25 miles away. Having a public university option, uh, whether it was within or outside of 25 miles, really did affect transfer rates. Our students in the university education deserts are not progressing as far along that transfer continuum as their peers at non-UEDs. And as we've said, it is affecting the transfer rates of these colleges. Consequently, we do have a higher number of our tier one students who are choosing to go out of state because that is a more viable option for them. The other conclusion is that we have a concentration of Latinx, first gen, and low income students in these UED areas being served by these colleges. And so distances are exacerbating the gaps that are already there that we've already seen over many years for these students. So we really definitely need to be looking at distance and how to uh, mitigate that factor to help students transfer. It's an urgent need, so we're hoping that this research can start to draw attention to that. So we've identified some solutions, and our panelists are going to get into this a bit more, but one of our possible solutions is that more bachelor's degrees need to be offered on the community college campuses because that's where the students are. And whether there's different ways to achieve that. Obviously, the bachelor's degree programs that we have are key among those, but we need to be looking at other options to bring the bachelor's degrees to the students. Let's go to the next slide. A few other options, a lot of times, people will say, well, they can get their degree online. Oh, yes, that is true, but online education, distance education is not for everyone for different reasons. Sometimes the program that you want to study isn't offered online, right? A lot of times, especially in these more rural areas, the internet is not as easily accessible, or even if it is, the quality is not as high as you would need it to be able to study and complete a full program that way. Um, Sometimes, people just don't want to learn that way. They don't feel comfortable, it's not their best way to learn. So again, online education isn't necessarily a one size fit all option for everyone. We definitely need to strengthen the partnerships between community colleges and universities, obviously looking at those transfer pathways, but looking for opportunities to partner, whether that's, university centers or some kind of arrangement to make it easier for students in these UEDs to transfer. And that might include partnering with out-of-state colleges, if that is the better option for students. We've got different policies that really need to make it to be, we need to make sure that they're taking distance into account. Obviously, Vision 2030 has an emphasis on baccalaureate completion, but if we're excluding entire parts of the state from that work, then that's not good. Obviously, AB 928, the Transfer Reform Act, definitely needs to be taking distance into account in those efforts. And then finally, looking at the impact of emphasizing transfer in the student-centered funding formula and how that affects a college's finances and their ability um, to increase their revenue. A couple more solutions on the next slide is just whatever we do, we need to make sure that we are meeting the needs, the specific needs of each community, especially our rural communities. We don't want to have students earning baccalaureate degrees for jobs that aren't there, that would require them to move. We want to try to not have what they call brain drain, where all the college graduates move away. We want to make sure that people have options, and therefore any educational options need to align with the jobs and careers that fulfill the needs of that community. And then lastly, we really would want to encourage different parts of the state. We looked at this statewide, but you might want to look at this within your region, within your district, look at the data. We're happy to share, all of what we've done so that you can do that. But maybe in your particular part of the state, this definition doesn't hold. And maybe you have to figure out what the definition would work for to describe the transfer patterns in your particular area. We're ready for our panel and we're early, so yay, we have more time for them. That's what we were hoping. So this is our esteemed panel. We'll introduce Dr. Lara Brady, who is with West Ed. We have Dr. Kate Mahar, who is at Shasta College. We have Joshua Simon, who is the Vice President with Student Senate and also a student at Lemoore College in Coalinga. And finally, Dr. Kevin Walters, who is the Superintendent President at Allen Hancock College. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Full disclosure, these are all members of our advisory committee. When we started this project, we formulated an advisory committee because we know we are not the experts on rural education and what became our, university education desert. So we're so grateful to have all of them here. I think that we want to get started with just very brief. I mean, I've said your names, but just very briefly to let everyone know your connection and kind of how you got here. And then we're going to jump into the first question.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kevin Walters, and we've been fighting the battle about geographic barriers for the 12 years that I've been at Allen Hancock College. We were just received conditional approval for a bachelor's degree. And as I sent out notice to our community, one of our county supervisors said I was tenacious. So, Darla, I think that's a code word that you would understand.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kate Mahar, and I am Associate Vice President of Innovation at Shasta College in far northern California. Our service area is 10,000 square miles. So, of course, we're very committed to figuring out educational options for folks. In the last several years, we've done a lot of work with our adult population, those with some college and no degree, and a lot of our students that would like to seek higher ed, whether it be associates or four-year, but really aren't able to leave that area. And I'll talk more about that a little bit, but it's great to be here.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Lara Brady, and I'm a senior manager at WestEd, specifically the Center for Economic Mobility, which opened up just over a year ago. We're very excited. We've been doing some work and trying to explore and understand some of the complexities that students, particularly in rural areas, experience. So that's our connection to this work, but thank you for inviting.
Hi, my name is Joshua Simon. I'm the Vice President of SSCCC, but I'm also a student at Lemoore College and also the student trustee for the district on that one too. So a little bit of some multiple hats in the play, but I love doing what I do when it comes to student advocacy and change on our campus.
Tell us about your experience as a transfer student.
So one of my experiences I've had with transfers, we have a lot of transfer fairs that are on campus. So we have ones that are connected locally. Like we do have some of our partners like Fresno State, FPCU, which is Fresno Pacific University, which that one's a private 4-year. Then we do have UC Merced, which is I think the newest UC in the UC system. With that one, so that's some of our relative options. We do have some other partnerships where we're connected with some of the other CSUs around, like CSUMB. That's a pretty common one that comes to their Grand Canyon University, and some that are in state and out of state that come to our college. So usually with resources, it's pretty easy for transfer. But one of the challenges I've seen for students, mostly with our area that's very rural, very like low to median income, is like the ability to finance their education to be able to continue on forward with stuff. There's some that do provide those type of resources and support, like for example with GCU, I know like since I'm an honor roll student at my college, they have an honors type of program and honor scholarship that if you're in that honor program within your college, that there is like a scholarship available for universities. And maybe that might not be my knowledge too much of other universities and how transfer stuff work, but that's one of the barriers that's helped with students. Then the other is just sometimes the distance. Like I know for around the Central Valley area, and kind of like what I was hearing from the last strengthening student success conference last week, was I was hearing from some of the constituents with like Coalinga, which is the district that I represent with that, then also with COS saying that basically the barrier of that is the distance to get towards there, which if there's some that are familiar and some that are not, one of the hardest things is like transportation. Over some students don't usually drive, or some students don't have the means of public transportation towards that area. So that's a little bit of a difficulty when it comes to transferring, at least in state or locally around that 40-mile range. Yeah, that's one of the common things. I mean, I could keep going on a little bit more and more because I'm kind of a talker, but that's kind of some of the common issues.
Now I'm going to turn to Dr. Walters to talk about the biggest challenges you have in related to trying to help students transfer from Allen Hancock College, and how have you been trying to address it?
So our challenge is, even though, and we had this conversation as part of the advisory group, that we kind of fall into that tier 2 group because Cal Poly is nearby, but Cal Poly is not an accessible institution for our community. Between Cal Poly and UCSB, they turn away more than 100,000 applicants a year. It's very difficult to get into those two institutions. And even for our students that do transfer to Cal Poly, what we know is that 25 to 30%, depending on the year, actually never enroll at Cal Poly. And unfortunately, we don't have any way of figuring out why that is, because we don't know who, unless the student tells us that they were accepted, we don't know how to find that student. But what we do know out of that, and that's, we're talking about somewhere in the 150 to 175 students, so 25 to 30% of those students. We know a couple of the students didn't pass a class or dropped a class they shouldn't have dropped, and kind of shot themselves in the foot on their way to Cal Poly. So that's a different thing. But we do have students who are back on campus the next fall, or they show up in the summer and they tell us they just can't afford it. Right? It's the sticker price at Cal Poly is $12,000 a year, and it's going up every year based on the most recent increases that they passed. And yes, there's financial aid and all of that, but even if the student's living at home and making that commute back and forth to Cal Poly, that's $30 a day. That's somewhere around a 75 to 80-mile round trip. And when you just kind of do the mileage on that, not to mention the lost time that a student could be using to work and support their family. So it's even for the local students, Cal Poly's not always an accessible option. Our community is very heavily laborers and farm workers. Our families live, 2 and 3 families in one house, in many cases. And for many of our students, their parents didn't even graduate high school. 40% of the adults over the age of 25 in our community don't have a high school diploma. So we're dealing with first generation high school students on our campus. So when you think about the dynamics of how those students try to progress through, we try to provide all the wraparound services we can on campus. We've invested a lot of our student equity money in actually creating jobs for students. We spend a tremendous amount of money because we know our students have to work, and if we can, we want them working on campus so that their bosses will be flexible with their schedule and help them support their family that way. And we found during the pandemic, we provided every student laptops and hotspots, and that didn't really solve the problem because when you've got 12 or 13 people living in a house, there's no quiet place to study. That there's no place that you can go. We actually ended up, before a lot of other colleges, creating safe spaces on campus where students could come. We made sure that the outdoors Wi-Fi was accessible for all the students. We built some spaces where students could go into classrooms if they needed to, so they could access the Wi-Fi and participate in their classes. So it's really difficult, to be able to tell our students, you need to finish your ADT. You need to, because I've been saying time is the enemy. I actually worked on the Complete College America original draft plan that said that. Like that was my staff who wrote that when I worked for the West Virginia higher education system. And we say time is the enemy, but if the students are going to finish their degree in 2 years and then they can't afford to leave for Fresno or Northridge or Bakersfield and they can't get into Cal Poly, they're just stuck. And given the fact that most of our students are Latino, they're stuck in a way that is systemically racist. There's no way around that. We have built higher education systems that are excluding Latino students on the Central Coast. And, it frustrates me, all these webinars that we keep having, that we're going to solve all this systemic injustice. And the most simple thing we could do would just be to allow, either have the CSU offer services here or allow Allen Hancock College to provide those services.
I just want to point out our first 2 panelists in their answers both talked about university affordability and that students either know that they can't or don't think that they can afford the university. So that lines up perfectly with what we didn't share from the Through the Gate study, which is our transfer capacity building framework. And university affordability was the #1 factor for everyone, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of location, regardless of any factor that we could come up with. University affordability was the #1 concern for all of our students. But I want to turn to Dr. Mahar with our next question, which is, you're at Shasta, and we calculated that to be about 75 miles from your nearest university, which is Chico State. So what kind of relationship do you have with Chico? How does that work when it's that far away, right? And are there other universities that you're partnering with to try to help your students transfer?
Absolutely. Chico State has been a fabulous partner for not only us, but for the North State. And they really take take it to heart that we are in their service area, even though there's some, I call it to the SISU, some students are about 5 hours away from Chico, but they've been a fabulous partner. And for us, Chico really represents our 2-prong approach to transfer. we have a very robust transfer center on our campus that really focuses on the CSUs and the UCs and those students that are really interested in doing more of a traditional face-to-face transfer model. And Chico is just a perfect partner for that. We have a dual admissions program. So if folks apply to Chico and don't get in or decide they want to do their first 2 years at Shasta, they come to us, but they have the guaranteed pathway and pipeline back. Chico also offers programs on our campus. So they actually come and they offer their business degree at Shasta College. And they've just been a great partner with what we have been calling reverse migration for some students that need to leave the area to get that degree. Chico will work with that student to make sure that they have a pathway back to our region. So for our teacher training programs, for our social work practicums, if students feel they have to leave the area to access that education, we make sure they have a pathway back. And that's been very, very successful. For students that aren't interested in the CSU or UC or more broadly, leaving the area at all isn't an option for them. We've created a program called BOLD, and BOLD is a bachelor's through online and local degree. And we serve the 10,000 square miles, and we also partner really closely with College of the CSUs. So what we did with BOLD was basically created, we jokingly called it an online transfer center. Because there's a lot of options out there that people might not be aware of. We have the criteria that has to be affordable and comparable to a CSU. We don't work with any nonprofits. We only work, with any for-profits. We only work with nonprofits. And we work really closely to identify those pathways that you were speaking of, Darla, where the BAs offered will lead to a degree in our region. And the components of BOLD, we have a wraparound support component. So for students that are really looking for more case management, they can take a 1-unit course at Shasta College that's paid for by our foundation. And by virtue of being in that 1-unit course, they can use our location, they can use our internet, they can use our extended ed sites, and they can get some case management. How's it going? You work really closely with Tina at the Learning Center over here. Who's your Tina at your new institution? Do you need help with financial aid? So we're able to give them that support so that they can be successful in their online program. Another component that we take really seriously is just awareness. Western Governors University, Southern Oregon University, Southern New Hampshire University. Those are incredible programs that do have that affordability in their forefront. And they will sometimes work with our students to even look at what type of aid we're getting through Cal Grant and try to match that in some way. And more broadly, the Aspen Institute came out with a framework a couple of years back about how to think about rural pathways. And the first component was to rethink where education can be offered. So we do a lot with dual enrollment. We ask our businesses, our hospitals, hey, can we offer some higher ed in this particular area? Programs like Chico State that will come onto Shasta's campus and after programs. So rethink where education is offered. Rethink how we can do wraparound supports for folks that are accessing non-traditional programs. And then, of course, always that reverse migration back. If you're really committed to this area and you need to go away, how do we make sure that you have an open door to come on back to the places that you want to call home? So those are a two-prong. Our traditional CSU UC, just a fabulous program, incredible people. And then we have the online training center, transfer center, our BOLD program. We've served 54 students so far this year that have just said, hey, what's out there for me? I have a family here. I can't leave the area. Affordability is an issue. Is there a way you can support me? So those are our two components with the goal of building all of these pathways back to our region linked to our economic needs.
That is fantastic. I guess I'm just curious that I'm really taken by your BOLD program. For those who do want an online education and that modality does work for them and it's the major that they want and it's affordable and all of those things. Do you know if other colleges or regions or have anything like that? Because I haven't heard anything. I was just wondering if you have.
No, we haven't. And part of our BOLD program, we are fortunate enough to receive the Innovation Award in 2017, where we promised to share it with anybody that would be interested, because the more pathways, the better. So we've worked closely with College of the Siskiyous. We were just at Redwoods the other day to share this concept. It really is guided pathways on steroids, where we've built out all these pathways and what exists. And the goal is really to make those connections for folks. So if we have a person up in Modoc County that received their associates at Shasta in criminal justice, and now they want to go to the ADG program at SAC, we will say, hey, so-and-so, did you know there's a person in Trinity that's also doing that, and trying to make those connections so nobody feels alone in their education. And all of our pathways, so you want to be a nurse, but you can't leave the area. So you want to be a teacher. We've mapped them all out with the affordability, with the supports that they can get. And we're happy to share with anyone on that.
Great. Well, we'll do our part to highlight that and make sure people know that that's an option and that you're willing to share.
Absolutely.
That's our culture. That's our culture.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
All right. Well, thank you. So our next question is for Dr. Laura Brady. So you're at WestEd. Everyone may not be familiar with WestEd and the work that you do, and in particular, how you're working to help students in these university education deserts reach their educational goals that obviously might include transferring and getting a bachelor's degree.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Cooper. WestEd is mostly known for their work around K through 12 and with little ones, 0 to 3-year-olds, which is a lot of cute work happening in that space, much, much needed. Right. But they have always, for a long time, they have been doing work in post-secondary, but up to very recently, we opened up a Center for Economic Mobility less than a couple of years ago. And we have a number of strands. One of those focuses specifically on adult ed, another one on workforce, another one in post-secondary. And so our role in this space is it's a little bit different because we don't work directly with students, right, or faculty or staff. We work with a variety of institutions, not just within California, but across the nation. And the Center for Economic Mobility has definitely explored some of the complexities that students in rural locations experience. And we see some of those commonalities with students who live in university education deserts, like Dr. Dacey just recently shared with us. But our strategy to support the needs of these students centers on a student-centered and systems change approach, because that's the support that we currently provide and the kind of folks that we deal with, especially because we don't work directly with students. We can't provide wraparound services or direct services to them, right? So I'll share some recent examples of that kind of work. Like for example, we recently partnered with CVHEC, that's the Central Valley Higher Education Consortium, to develop their strategic plan and help to identify key partnerships and potential priorities to center the regional work for the next 3 to 5 years, and think about how they could support students by looking at partnerships from 2-year and 4-year universities, both public and private. And they have a great regional model that has all of those institutional leaders sitting at the same table on a quarterly basis, talking about some of the issues that impact students in the region, very in a regular basis, looking at the data, looking at the resources, trying to leverage, try to align some resources and support the work to ultimately support the academic achievement of students in that space. In addition, earlier this spring, we released an article focused on supporting adult learners in rural education that highlights 3 ways that educational institutions can enhance their existing curricula to reflect high demand skills in careers that provide family sustaining wages, right? And meet the need of adult learners where they are. And, you know, it was mentioned earlier, the brain drain, about how you want to support students to continue their educational career, but you also want to entice them to come back and help support their own community. So those 3 ways that we share are: 1, strengthening on-ramps. You know, Dr. Kate Mahar talked a little bit about guided pathways, and that just triggered my brain and going in a number of different directions, right? But definitely helping to increase access to education and training programs. So, for example, creating accessible entry points to post-secondary education for adults living in rural communities, and what that will look like and what some of those partnerships can entail. The second one is addressing the opportunity costs of education for adult learners in rural communities specifically. Like, highlighting the importance of career pathways that lead to family-sustaining wages. For example, using earn while you earn models, which can also help to reduce the cost of attendance and can occur in a variety of fields like accounting, culinary, healthcare, not just CTE related fields. And WestEd, to that end, has published a number of dashboards that highlight labor market information connected to educational pathways. So students know if you major in this area, what are some of the jobs available in your region and how much do they pay and how does that compare to livable wage, right, where you are. And then the last one is meeting the basic needs of adult learners in rural communities. Dr. Walters talked about providing wraparound services, right, and ensuring the sustainability for training and providing the services for students that is much needed. But in terms of our systems change perspective, which is some of the work that the center is focusing, the center is partnering with transfer level programs such as Puente to understand some of the components that can be scaled across all community colleges and the required support needed to ensure that they're successful, particularly in keeping an equity lens to scaling practices that support the academic achievement of students. And like it was mentioned earlier, understanding that the majority of students in community colleges are Latino background, and they're the ones who get closer to be at the gate, but they don't cross that threshold. What are some of the supports and that are needed both in terms of program level and institutional level that can make that extra push happen, right? But I'll stop right there. I know there's so much to share, but I'll let other folks share their perspective as well.
Well, that was a great thing because not to be too self-promoting, but in our Through the Gate study, we did look at different groups, and one of them was our Latinx students, and specifically trying to get at this question of why are you going all the way to the gate and then not going through? And it was a lot of what we've already been talking about. It's about affordability. It's about honestly not wanting to, or at least feeling able to move. And that to transfer requires moving. And people shouldn't be required to move away from their homes, their families, their communities, their jobs, their kids' schools, whatever it is that they would have to leave. They shouldn't have to. That shouldn't be, the only option that or viable option for our students. So it's something that we really need to be looking at this as an equity issue. Is it absolutely is one. Okay, so our next question is try to, raise it up. We've been talking about kind of what's happening at individual colleges. We've heard from our student, our college president, or vice president in these UEDs. But when we take it up a notch to that statewide policy perspective, and so we designed this question for both Dr. Walters and Dr. Laura Brady. But feel free, Dr. Mahar and Joshua, if you also want to chime in on this. It's really about how can we start to address this at that statewide level? What are the policies? What are the initiatives that you can either think of or know of or maybe already exist that just need tweaking or expansion? So we'll start with Dr. Laura Brady. Even though you just talked, you get to go first.
Sure. I'm curious to see and hear what Dr. Walters has to share as well. But, in understanding the importance that a bachelor's degree carries, especially in obtaining a job that leads to livable wage, to family sustaining wages, right? A lot of it also comes down to capacity issue. If you're talking about a state that has 115 community colleges physically, and there's less than 30 CSU campuses and less than 10 UC schools, has that served the needs of all the students that are graduating, right? So I don't know, I'm thinking about the systems change perspective and thinking about what are some of the ways that we could increase the collaboration between the education systems to provide solid, sustainable avenues for students to transfer and actually obtain bachelor's degree, right? So our team is very excited about looking at large statewide efforts such as the Vision 2030, which was mentioned earlier from Chancellor Christian, as well as a new master plan for career education that can help pave the way for addressing some of these issues and advance equity efforts. At the regional level, our team is also excited to support a number of K-16 collaborative regional work that can help sustain and build some of these pathways at a more granular level, right? Another area that I'll mention that our team is very excited about is the first data dashboard from cradle to career that will be released soon, which will be focused on understanding the student pathway story. And it would help to further uncover ways we can support students living in university education deserts. So I'll leave it at that, but there's so many ways that our team is looking into how can we provide support to this very much needed population in terms of a system change perspective. But Dr. Walters, I'm curious to hear your perspective.
I appreciate that long-term view you're taking. We've been working on trying to expand access to four-year programs in, literally for more than 2 decades. The entire time I've been here, and Paul Murphy, who probably all the people on this webinar knew, who just retired, he was doing it for a decade before I got here. And every time we would run into a roadblock with the CSU, and it was just one roadblock after another. And we've tried the model at Shasta College, and we can't get a commitment from the CSU to come and serve students in this community. So I believe the most effective tool for students in these higher education deserts is to have community college baccalaureates. Our community colleges are different. Hancock College and Shasta College, Hartnell College even, although they're very close to Monterey Bay. But when you look at Siskiyou and Feather River, we are so integrated into our communities. There is nothing we do that isn't closely tied to our community. This is the conversation I have every night. I'm on, and I'm not. This is not a complaint, but this has just been, for the past week since last Thursday, it's literally been an event every night, and on the weekend something during the day. So I'll end up on Saturday night with, it'll be 10 or 11 straight days of events, and people in our community want to talk about one thing: how do our students get back bachelor's degrees? That's it. That's the conversation they want to have, because they know their employers and they need workers. Their parents and their kids can't go away. I wish every single one of our students could go to Cal Poly. I really do. My greatest educational experience was at the University of Texas at Austin, #1 football team in the nation. And but I wish that our kids could have that type of experience, that full-blown university residential collegial experience. That reality is not the case, but if we can offer some selected bachelor's degrees for students today, their kids can go to Cal Poly, their kids can go. We can make generational change just by saying we're not going to have turf wars in the higher education deserts. They can fight it out in the urban areas, and I'm going to leave that fight for my friends in the urban areas. But the reality is we need baccalaureate degrees in Santa Maria and Lompoc at scale. Working with 15 to 20 students at a time is not going to solve the issue for hundreds of students that are being left behind.
Joshua, did you have anything, or Dr. Mahar, that you wanted to add about the statewide policy perspective?
Yeah, we have a couple things that we're always trying to bring to the forefront. Thank you for asking. Definitely the BA options offered in our local areas. We have one program, and it's just been a great success, where folks can access the training they need here. We also would love to just keep people in the forefront with our funding formula. The funding formula does give credit for transport, but only to in-states. So just to give a shout out, Southern Oregon University, University of Reno, Nevada, amazing transfer institutions. So if we include that somehow in our funding formula, that'd be fantastic. And the last one is, I'm just so proud to work for a community college, because we have been so innovative in really understanding our students and trying to serve them better, especially our adult learners, and other folks that we've talked about. And part of the way we are doing that is through things like credit for prior learning, competency-based ed. So some of the policy around helping CSUs develop a CPL or CBE policy, or a UC, to think about how they accept credit for prior learning and competency-based ed. What I think really address some key gaps in that pathway to completion.
Joshua?
So I would say one of the things that helps a lot with students is finding classes that correlate with the workforce. I think it's always dependent on the community, like what type of classes are needed to provide in order to either one, get them to transfer, or two, to be able to get them towards that workforce. Because, every student is different. They either go that very traditional path right after high school, going into community, then transferring to a 4-year, or usually it's a different path that heads them and takes them into college, then goes around that same different path. But it just it varies. Like, for example, like with Lemoore College, we've been implementing a lot of like agricultural based work programs because around our area is very ag. So we've been working to do a little bit of some non-credit classes so people can gain that experience in the workforce, and we've been doing some that are accredited so that they can get that degree in agriculture or business agriculture, so they can start on the right path with that. But like with my college, it's not the same as like another college across the way, but it just depends in particular like what the community needs, like what type of workforce opportunities are out there, and seeing like how the prep for transfer or their ed plan correlates to what they want to do, either in transfer for CSU or UC. But that's kind of like how I see it, particularly as a student. It's a little bit of it's a different mindset of how I interpret with that. But I always say just depending on specifically like what the needs are, and like the demand in the I'm a business major, so I always like to see the demand in the market or demand in the workplace specifically. The more there's that opportunity for students to not only gather their education, but bring them on to the next part of their journey. But that's all I have in particular with that.
No, we appreciate it. So we have one last question, it's kind of the catch-all, say whatever else, say what you haven't said yet. But are there any other solutions that you think could be either at the local or state level or regional level that would really benefit students in these university education deserts the most in their pursuit of a baccalaureate degree and by way of transfer? So whoever wants to go first on that one, chime in.
I'll start it off. I would say one of the best ways is to connect with the students. One-on-one is the best way to figure out like what is a need and what is a want, is to get students involved in those type of pathways. Either it's that understanding like what curriculum is needed on that campus in order to help them transfer to what they want to do. Because every university in UC is different. Like, let's say, for example, like if I wanted to do a business program, they may not have it at UCLA, but they may have like a similar business thing for CSUMB. So specifically maybe in marketing or with other different CSUs. Like I know CSU Fresno has a really good business school that is like multi-platform to different type of business that you want to do. So it's about learning the adaptability of what CSUs have to offer, UCs, what they have, and seeing like as we develop these curriculums, as we develop these classes for students, to see like it's not going to only get them to where they need, but get them interested. Because I think one of the hardest thing for me as a student is to be in the type of classes where it's just, it's taught the way that curriculum has been for a while, but it's hard to kind of like stay focused in. And kind of like what was mentioned earlier, every student's different. Basically, there's the different modalities that students learn in. It's in the online environment and in person. So it's looking at from that population like what works for that, and seeing like how you can open that opportunity more for students. Because the more flexibility you have, the more there's higher enrollment, and the higher that it might, not saying it's a full 100%, but it leads to that door of opportunity to transfer once they do get their degree or their AA and transfer, then going from there. But with that in mind, that's all I have. I know right now I do have class I gotta head to right now, but I wanted to thank you for the time. I wanted to say that the Strengthening Student Success Conference was definitely worth it. So for all that's attending, shameless plug, but definitely check it out next year when whatever conferences they have for the RP group. And thank you for having me as a panelist.
Thank you, Joshua. Get to class. Good luck. Thank you. Dr. Walter?
Darn, I think as we've been discussing this bachelor's degree opportunity, um, really the only place that we've received pushback from this is from Cal Poly and Cal Poly affiliates. And we've had a couple of public conversations where somebody would say, well, there's nothing wrong with getting a vocational degree, or there's nothing wrong with getting an associate's degree. And I'm like, I agree. I've sort of built a whole career on that concept. But what's wrong is making that the only choice for the students. When you tell the students your only option is to get a 2 year degree or pay for an expensive online degree, um, that's where it's problematic, and that's where the systemic issues arise when we can't get the investment that Cal State magically found all kinds of money to save the Maritime Academy. So there's money and resources available to merge the second whitest Cal State institution with the whitest Cal State institution. So it's baffling to me how not only does the Cal State University not want to serve my community, they don't want anyone else to serve it either. And that's in the state of California. I can't believe that that's actually a policy decision we've made. So that's tenacity, right?
And my only additional thoughts, I mean, everybody has covered such important topics, and the study itself just brings up such interesting ways to look at this particular issue. In our rural environment, of course, we care so much about relationships. And I think one of the biggest things we've found through any of our programs is really that one-to-one connection. It can be intimidating to leave our area to any institution. So we try to do a lot of warm handoffs. So we will call someone at Chico or Davis and say, hey, if the student come in, and can we make that connection? And I know in rural environments, we tend to be a little bit smaller, so we can do that. But it's just, Dr. Cooper, you had mentioned the real or perceived cost of higher ed. There's a lot of misinformation out there that sometimes can be dispelled just by building on those particular relationships. So very, very promising. I know that the issues are very real and very complex, but it does seem like great energy going in the right direction.
Thank you, but you have sparked some ideas in addition to what I was going to share. But Dr. Kevin, you mentioned something that made me think about the latest Ed Trust West forum, equity forum that took place a couple years ago. The keynote speaker was Nicole Hannah-Jones, which is phenomenal. And she started off her keynote speech by mentioning that the most racist state against Latinos is California. And I have been thinking about that ever since. And so I'm thinking about a systemic approach, systemic perspectives, and how to tackle these things so that, it doesn't come down to one-on-one connection like Dr. Mahar was mentioning, because it's exhausting. And that puts the onus on that one person with the other connection, right? And so in thinking about like systemic efforts, large statewide efforts, I'm thinking about like the master plan for career education that should be really soon, that can help to pave the way for addressing some of these issues and help to advance some of the equity efforts that we have set in motion. And so I'm thinking about some of those larger perspectives, but I'm excited about being part of the advisory committee for this study, and I look forward to see what other additional questions it helps to raise and how we could come together and help support students. But thank you.
Well, I can't thank our panelists enough. I mean, good information, good perspectives. I know I learned a lot, as I always do every time we get any portion of this group together. I've got notes for you, Daisy, of course. We will finalize this report. I don't know, Daisy, if you want to pull up, there's, I think, a few ending slides before we close out. We've been monitoring the Q&A. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I think we've answered them and I thank my panelists for doing that. Just wanted to let you know what we're working on next. And so there's we have these questions, which, the data can only take you so far, can only paint so much of the picture or outline so much of the picture. So what we would like to do is go to some of these colleges and talk to the students, first of all, but also the practitioners, and to hear those stories and then to share those stories of what the realities are. And really, at least, for me, my question is, I think we all understand distance and how that could be a barrier. But what specifically is it about the distance? Because it could be different things for different students. And if it is a different thing, then you need a different solution, right? So I think we need to get more in there to see what are the things what are the specific obstacles, within, the distance. And then obviously, what are the solutions? What are the resources? How do we help the students overcome whatever the reason for distance being their barrier. So obviously going to these campuses, talking to students in focus groups, doing surveys, doing interviews with practitioners. The other thing we're working on, and hopefully we'll have done soon, is actually an interactive map that we'll put on our website that anyone can use to kind of explore a lot of the data that we shared with you if you want to kind of drill down a little bit and see what it looks like in specific areas of the state. So stay tuned for that map. So we are finishing the report. Poor Daisy, or poor Dr. Segovia. Every time we do one of these presentations, we get more information and we change the report. And another shout out to our advisory committee members, these in particular, wonderful feedback. We took everything that you said and we revamped the report. Be excited for you all to see that, and hopefully it reflects the feedback that you gave us. But we took it to heart, we took it seriously, and made those adjustments. So we will have this report ready. We're trying to get it done by the end of this month. So stay tuned for that, and we will definitely be advertising that in our super brief, and it will be on the web page. Before I forget, I asked Dr. Mahar to share this link for if people want more information about their BOLD program. Want to make sure you have that. I wanted to also share, if you're curious about the OG study, that's what we call it now, the original study of Through the Gate, sharing that. And then finally want to share the link to this webpage, this Geographic Barriers Project webpage. You can get to that as well. And there's also a QR code there for that. But I said we're super excited about this work and really hoping that we can affect change. That's really why I think all of us are here. That's why we're doing this. So we're really hoping to get some more traction around this and start to share it in different spaces so that we can improve students' transfer outcomes. Oh, thank you. Dr. Laura Brady shared the article that she had mentioned. Are there any other questions? I think that to the report. As I mentioned, the report is in progress. We're going to do I'm going to promise Daisy that I'm only going to give her one more thing to change, and then we're going to call it final. But I thank you all for being here. Thank you for spending your lunchtime with us. Thank you again to the panelists. Thank you to Dr. Segovia and all of her work in this. And stay tuned. More to come.